God, these are conservatives who looked at my record, looked at my plan to get this economy going. I happen to believe that if we want to replace a lifetime politician like Barack Obama, who had no experience leading anything, you have to choose someone who's not been a lifelong politician, who has not spent his entire career in Washington, and instead has proven time and again he can lead in the private sector twice, in the Olympics, and as a governor. We've got to nominate a leader if we're going to replace someone who is not a leader.
Well, Senator Santorum, had you not lost for re-election in 2006, you would have been in Washington even longer than you were. It would have been 21 years, so you've got a long Washington record. How do you address this question? Why shouldn't Governor Romney be the nominee? What is disqualifying in your judgment?
Well, if his record was so great as governor of Massachusetts, why didn't you run for re-election? I mean, if you didn't want to even stand before the people of Massachusetts and run on your record, if it was that great, why did you bail out? I mean, the bottom line is, I go and fight the fight. If it was that important to the people of Massachusetts that you were going to go and fight for them, at least you could stand up and make the battle that you did a good job. I did that. I ran for re-election a couple of times, and I won a couple of times. And in a 71% Democratic district, when I ran for re-election, I was redistricted. And I was in a 71% Democratic district, had a 90% conservative voting record. It was a hard thing to do. My district was more Democrat than the state of Massachusetts that I ran in. It was the Steel Valley of Pittsburgh. And I stood up and fought for the conservative principles. I didn't do what Governor Romney did in 1994. I was running the same year he ran in 1994. I ran in a tough state of Pennsylvania against an incumbent. Governor Romney lost by almost 20 points. Why? Because at the end of that campaign, he wouldn't stand up for conservative principles. He ran from Ronald Reagan. And he said he was going to be to the left of Ted Kennedy on gay rights, on abortion, a whole host of other issues. We want someone when the time gets tough, and it will in this election. We want someone who's going to stand up and fight for the conservative principles, not bail out and not run to the left of Ted Kennedy.
Well, you did say when you endorsed him 4 years ago, just those words, that he would stand up for conservative principles, Senator.
Vis-a-vis John McCain.
Vis-a-vis John McCain. Governor, your response.
Well, a lot of things that were inaccurate in that. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but I can tell you this. I think it's unusual and perhaps understandable that people who spend their life in politics imagine that if you get in politics, that's all you want to do. That if you've been elected to something, well, you want to get reelected and reelected. I went to Massachusetts to make a difference. I didn't go there to begin a political career running time and time again. I made a difference. I put in place the things I wanted to do. I listed out the accomplishments we wanted to pursue in our administration. There were 100 things we wanted to do. Those things I pursued aggressively. Some we won, some we didn't. Run again? That would be about me. I was trying to help get the state in as best shape as I possibly could. Left the world of politics, went back into business. Now I have the opportunity, I believe, to use the experience I have. You got a surprised look at your face. Wait, wait, it's still my time.
Are you going to tell people you're not going to run for re-election for president if you win?
Rick, it's still my time.
I'm just asking.
Okay. Well,
go ahead, Governor Romney. Governor Romney, take 30 seconds there.
Yeah. What I'm going to tell you is, this for me, politics is not a career. For me, my career was being in business and starting a business and making it successful. My life's passion has been my family, my faith, and my country. I believe by virtue of the experiences I've had that I'm in a good position to make a contribution to Washington. I long for a day when instead of having people who go to Washington for 20 and 30 years who get elected and then when they lose office, they stay there and make money as lobbyists or connecting to businesses, I think it stinks. I think we ought to have people go to Washington and serve Washington and serve as the people of their nation and go home. I'd like to see term limits in Washington.
So one term.
And so, as the President of the United States, if I'm elected, of course I'll fight for a second term.
Speaker Gingrich,
there's a lot of work to be done.
Take 30 seconds here to get it.
I realize the red light doesn't mean anything to you because you're the front runner. But can we drop a little bit of the pious baloney? The fact is, you ran in '94 and lost. That's why you weren't serving the Senate with Rick Santorum. The fact is, you had a very bad re-election rating. You dropped out of office. You had been out of state for something like 200 days preparing to run for president. You didn't have this interlude of citizenship while you thought about what to do. You were running for president while you were governor. You were going all over the country. You were out of state consistently. You then promptly re-entered politics. You happened to lose to McCain, as you had lost to Kennedy. Now you're back running. You've been running consistently for years and years and years. So this idea that suddenly citizenship showed up in your mind, just level with the American people. You've been running for at least since the 1990s.
Governor, please.
Mr. Speaker, citizenship has always been on my mind. And I happened to see my dad run for governor when he was 54 years old. He had good advice to me. He said, Mitt, never get involved in politics if you have to win an election to pay a mortgage. If you find yourself in a position when you can serve, well, you ought to have a responsibility to do so if you think you can make a difference. He said, also don't get involved in politics if your kids are still young, because it may turn their heads. I never thought I'd get involved in politics. When I saw Ted Kennedy running virtually unopposed in 1994, a man who I thought by virtue of the policies of the liberal welfare state had created a permanent underclass in America, I said someone's got to run against him. And I happened to have been wise enough to realize I didn't have a ghost of a chance of beating him. This guy from Republican from Massachusetts was not going to beat Ted Kennedy. And I told my partners in my firm, I'll be back in 6 months, don't take my chair. And I went in and gave it a real battle and went after it. I was happy that he had to take a mortgage out on his house to ultimately defeat me. And I'm very proud of the fact that I have stood up as a citizen to battle where I felt it was best for the nation. And we're talking about running for president. I'm in this race because I care about the country. I believe my background and experience will help me be an effective president.
Let me bring Dr. Paul into this, because there is a question about who is the true conservative in the race. And Governor Romney said only 9 years ago during an interview with New England Cable News, he said the following: I think people recognize that I'm not a partisan Republican, that I'm someone who is moderate and my views are progressive. Do you believe Governor Romney now when he says that he is a man of constancy and that he'll stand up for conservative principles?
You know, I think this whole discussion so far has been very superficial. And I think the question, in a way, that you ask is superficial in that you're talking about character, which is very important, but I think we should deal with the issues as well. But I don't see how we can do well against Obama if we have any candidate that, endorsed, single-payer systems and TARP bailouts and don't challenge the Federal Reserve's $15 trillion of injection bailing out their friends. I don't see how we can have anybody really compete with Obama who doesn't challenge this huge empire we have overseas and the overseas spending. I mean, this is how nations come down, is they extend themselves too far overseas. That's how the Soviets came down. We really have to talk about real cuts, and we haven't gotten around to this yet. So if we want to change things, this is what we have to talk about. Character is important and motivation is important. Our history is important, but I really consider that in the debate format to be less significant than what we really believe in.
You read my mind, Dr. Paul, and we're going to get to some of the tough choices, not just on politics, but on policy. First, Governor Perry, I do want to ask you, though, flat out, your stake in your campaign going down to South Carolina. Is Governor Romney unelectable in your judgment?
Well, I think you have to ask the question of who is it that can beat Obama? Who is it that can invigorate the Tea Party? Who is it that can take the message of smaller outsider government that's truly going to change that place? As I look from here down to Rick Santorum, I see insiders, individuals who have been the big spending Republicans in Washington, D.C. And let's be honest with ourselves. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Obama has thrown gasoline on the fire. But the bonfire was burning well before Obama got there. It was policies and spending, both from Wall Street and from the insiders in Washington, D.C., that got us in this problem. And we need a candidate that can not only draw that stark contrast between themselves and Barack Obama, but also stand up and lead the Tea Party movement back. 2010 was about the Tea Party standing up and understanding that Republicans, big spending Republicans, had caused as much of this problem as anything. And it was their power that brought together, that brought Washington, D.C. and the House to Republican control. And that's the kind of individual we got to have to lead this.
Before I get to Governor Huntsman,
election.
I'd be remiss, Governor Romney, if I did not allow you to respond to the quote that I read from you 9 years ago. What would you say to conservatives so that they'll trust that you will stand up for conservative principles?
They've got my record as governor. That's the great thing, and people here in New Hampshire is they see what I did as governor of Massachusetts. I also had the occasion, after my last failed attempt to run for president, a learning experience, to sit down and write a book. And I wrote a book and described my view for the country. And people can describe it in differing ways, but my view is that the principles that I've learned in business and the principles as governor, frankly, it made me more conservative as time has gone on. I've seen a lot of government trying to solve problems, and it didn't work. And my view is the right course for America is to have someone who understands how the economy works, who will passionately get America back on track.
All right, we're going to come back to the question of obstacles to the nomination, but let me get to policy, Governor Huntsman. This is, by all accounts, an age of austerity for this country, a jobs crisis, also a spending crisis in Washington. I wonder what specifically you would do to say to Americans, these are cuts I'm going to make in federal spending that will cause pain, that will require sacrifice.
Let me say, first of all, with respect to Governor Romney, you know, there are a lot of people who were tuning in this morning, and I'm sure they're terribly confused after watching all of this political spin up here. I was criticized last night by Governor Romney for putting my country first. And I just want to remind the people here in New Hampshire and throughout the United States that I think he criticized me while he was out raising money for serving my country in China. Yes, under a Democrat, like my two sons are doing in the United States Navy. They're not asking what political affiliation the president is. I want to be very clear with the people here in New Hampshire and this country. I will always put my country first, and I think that's important to them.
All right, well, why don't you get a response, Governor Romney, and then I'll come back to you on the austerity question.
I think we serve our country first by standing for people who believe in conservative principles and doing everything in our power to promote an agenda that does not include President Obama's agenda. I think the decision to go and work for President Obama is one which you took. I don't disrespect your decision to do that. I just think it's most likely that the person who should represent our party running against President Obama is not someone who called him a remarkable leader and went to be his ambassador in China.
This nation is divided, David, because of attitudes like that. The American people are tired of the partisan division. They have had enough. There is no trust left among the American people and the institutions of power and among the American people and our elected officials.
All right.
And I say, we've had enough, and we have to change our direction in terms of coming together as Americans first and foremost
Dr.
and
Paul
finding
said,
solutions to our
let's not be
problems.
superficial. Let's talk substance. So, Governor Huntsman, name 3 areas where Americans will feel real pain in order to balance the budget.
Well, I would have to say that I agree with the Ryan Plan. I think I'm the only one standing up here who has embraced the Ryan Plan. It's a very aggressive approach to taking about $6.2 trillion out of the budget over 10 years. And it looks at everything. And what I like about it is it says there will be no sacred cows. Medicare won't be a sacred cow. Department of Defense won't be a sacred cow. As President of the United States, I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to say we are where we are. 24% spending as a percentage of GDP. We've got to move to 19%.
3 programs that will make Americans feel pain, sir.
Well, let me just say on entitlements. Across the board, I will tell the upper income category in this country that there will be means testing. There are a lot of people in this nation who don't need some of the
Social Security and
benefits.
Medicare.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I'm not going to tie Department of Defense spending to some percentage of GDP. I'm going to tie it to a strategy that protects the American people. And if we think that we can't find efficiencies and cuts in the Department of Defense budget, then we are crazy.
Senator Santorum, same question. 3 programs that would have to be cut to make Americans feel pain, to sacrifice if we're going to balance the budget.
I would agree with Governor Huntsman that means testing. I talked about that in Hollis yesterday. We had about 1,200 people there, and I walked through and talked about how we have to make sure that we're not going to burden future generations with a Social Security program that's underfunded. It's underfunded right now. And we have to take those who have been successful, who are seniors, who have a tremendous amount of wealth, and we got to reduce benefits. It makes no sense for folks who are struggling right now to pay their payroll tax, which is the biggest tax. It's tax on labor. It makes us uncompetitive. And the idea that some on the left would have to raise those taxes to make labor even more uncompetitive for those working people who are trying to get a job to subsidize high-income seniors doesn't make any sense to me. Food stamps is another place. We've got to block grant and send it back to the states, just like I did on welfare reform. Do the same thing with Medicaid. Those 3 programs, we got to, including housing programs, block grant them, send it back to the states, require work, and put a time limit. You do those 3 things, we will help take these programs, which are now dependency programs, which people are continually dependent upon, and you take them into transitional programs to help people move out of poverty.
Speaker Gingrich, on the issue of Medicare, when you were on Meet the Press earlier in the year, you had talked about what Paul Ryan was talking about as a step too far, which is moving seniors onto a premium support or a voucher program, depending on how you phrase it. As you know, Senator Santorum thinks that current seniors should be moved off of that program into premium support or a voucher program. Do you agree with doing it that quickly and making current